Welcome to the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley, psychology student and international best-selling psychology author of over 30 psychology books, bringing you the latest psychology news, fascinating psychology topics and more each week. If you want to learn more, then please check out connorwhiteley.net/books. And don't forget to like and subscribe to the YouTube video or follow on your favourite podcast app. And here's the show. Hi everyone and welcome to episode 194 of the Psychology World podcast with me, Connor Whiteley. And today's episode is on who is most vulnerable to misinformation, and it is the 4th of March 2023 as I record this. So today's episode is a really fun one because we're basically stepping away from clinical psychology and the sort of normal topics of like the podcast and returning towards social psychology, because misinformation is an absolutely critical topic that is so important. Like these days, especially with the rise of like fake news, misinformation, and so many other important topics that we need to understand, not only to protect ourselves, but actually protect society, democracy, etc. as a whole. This is just such a great podcast episode because misinformation is just a really fun topic, especially when you get a really passionate lecturer on it. So that's coming up in the content part of today's episode. But moving on to the psychology news section, we're reading from the British Psychological Society Research Digest, and the first one is particularly fun, I think. Couples feel closer after indulging in unhealthy behaviours together. Most of us will be able to think of times we've engaged in problematic behaviours because it's benefited us and our social relationships in the short term. Perhaps you smoked a cigarette because your friend was having one, stayed for that one extra drink even though you probably should have gone home, or lounged on the sofa with your partner rather than going out because it just seemed easier. Now, researchers have found that engaging in these kinds of behaviours with a romantic partner can actually bring you closer. This study brings up interesting questions about how the rewards associated with problematic short-term behaviours might impact our ability to achieve healthier long-term goals. Okay, so from a relationship point of view, this is a rather sort of interesting, but also sort of like a weirder one though, because you would have thought that your partner or your romantic partner is always a sort of good influence, even though as I say that I realise that's completely wrong. I can't believe I even thought of that. But if we take the going out example, then you would have thought that your partner would have been a good influence about going out because it's more romantic and it's more ideal. But even though, as I say that again, I realise that it is just easier most of the time though. And I can imagine people when there's not particularly a lot of motivation, that it's just easier to stay at home because you're still together, you're still doing something together. And again, it's an unhealthy habit that brings you closer. But also, at the end of the Psychology News article, also raises a good question though, because how do these short-term impacts but that might have the positive benefit of bringing people closer, but it makes healthier long-term goals a bit less likely to actually be achieved. So an interesting question. So what more research will definitely have to be done to find out. So the second one is, we remember stories better when they're about survival situations. Okay. What makes one story stick in our minds for years, but another disappear once we've closed the final page? The nature of a character's plight can influence how well we're likely to remember the story. According to a recent study, the team finds that we're better at recalling details of the stories where characters are in survival situations, suggesting that such stories are particularly good at transporting us into their world. Okay, so that's interesting. I really can't say too much on this because I know tons of other techniques and tons of other strategies that professional writers use to actually get a reader into their story. And I mean, I can understand where this research is like coming from because a tense situation is a really important to have like suspense and tension, but it doesn't. But transporting into the world, that's more stuff like depth, pacing, and a bunch of other stuff. So I can't say too much without boring you, without boring with all the like vital details. But it's an interesting point though. And the final one is Olympic archers that performed worse when they had higher heart rates. High stress levels hinder performance on all kinds of tasks, but do elite athletes suffer in the same way? In the past, this has been difficult to measure, but thanks to the introduction of heart rate monitoring cameras in the archery competitions at the 2020 Tokyo Olympics, we now have an answer. Researchers have found when archers had higher heart rates, they get lower scores, providing some of the first direct evidence that psychological stress has a detrimental effect on elite athletes too. So very quickly though, because sports psychology isn't really like my area of expertise whatsoever. I've had one lecture on it, and because someone kept asking questions, we only got through like a quarter of the lecture. None of us were impressed with that person. First of all, I did manage to take away from that sports psychology lecture was that professional athletes actually have a lot of like psychological training, and normally though like they're quite conditioned to high stress situations. Yeah, but I guess there's a massive difference between training and actually performing in right, actually performing in the Olympics. So basically, I don't think there's any training that can actually prepare you like that, though, and it does show us. This direct evidence is good because this is the first time that this has ever been done. Plus, it'd be interesting to think about what other implications could this have. Because ideally, you would want to find some sort of countermeasure or some sort of way to deal with this, just so these athletes aren't actually impacted by the psychological stress that they're going through. But I have no idea how you would actually go around that. So I hope you enjoy the psychology news section. So let's move on to the personal update. So moving on to the personal update. So this personal update will actually be very short because it's mainly been like data analysis again, writing up the results section, and basically like continuing with my final year project. Then there's been lectures, meetings, and basically everything is going on. And next week I've got something that I consider quite scary, which is something to do with called a graduation launch day. So you get your sizes of your gown and cap and all of that, and like you will find out the actual day that you're graduating. So I think so. When I read the email on Friday, I was a bit surprised because I was thinking, oh yes, like I'm almost done here. But again, because I know I'm doing my masters, and there's the potential that I'm going to be doing something else at the same university, it doesn't feel final, but it's still quite surprising that oh yes, I'm going to be graduating in a few months. So that was quite interesting, but lots are going on, just nothing that would interest any of you. And as always, I always love to hear your thoughts and feelings on today's episode. So you can always email me, connorwhiteley@connorwhiteley.net. You can always leave a comment down the show notes at connorwhiteley.net/podcast, and you can always leave a comment on a Facebook post or tweet me at sci-fi Whiteley, or for Facebook, Connor Whiteley, psychology author. I always love to hear from all of you because it really helps make the podcast feel more like a conversation. And today's episode has been sponsored by Social Psychology, a guide to social and cultural psychology, 4th edition. And this is a brilliant sponsor for today's episode because a lot of misinformation actually relies on a lot of social processes. For example, like a person's group membership and a whole bunch of other social processes. But this great, really easy to understand book actually goes into a lot more topics. For example, how does a coach impact our social processes? How does globalization? How is our social identity formed, as well as the self? And a personal favourite is persuasion. That's a really fun area to actually look at. So, if you wanted to really deepen your understanding about social psychology, then definitely check out Social Psychology, a guide to social and cultural psychology, available from all the major ebook retailers, and you can get the paperback and hardback version from Amazon, your local bookstore, or local library if you request it. And you can also buy the ebook directly from me at playhip.com/Connor Whiteley. And buying it directly from authors, it just helps to support them more because the authors get more of the money in instead of the larger retailers. So that's enough the personal update. Let's move on to the content part of today's episode. So we're moving on to the content part of today's episode. So we're going to be talking about who is most vulnerable to misinformation. And the reason why I actually wanted to talk about this in today's episode is because misinformation is a massive problem that has a whole range of consequences, and all of them are negative. And this became particularly stark and very clear during the COVID-19 pandemic, because as you would probably know, that there was a massive spread of misinformation about health, the disease, and the vaccines. So this caused a hell of a lot of damage. So that's why we actually need to talk about it in today's episode. So let's dive into it. Who is most vulnerable to misinformation? Because of the interest in the problem and risk associated with misinformation, a lot of researchers and academics have studied in investigating this topic in a lot more depth in an effort to help tackle this stark problem. And yet, there is one question that keeps arising without a seemingly clear answer. Who is the most vulnerable to misinformation? Then there are of course sub questions that are quite rightly get attached to this big one. For example, researchers are interested in, are there certain environmental or circumstantial factors that impact someone's vulnerability, or do personality or psychological profiles predict someone's firm belief in misinformation? Oh, I hate that term, psychological profiles, because it just reminds me of criminal profiling. And yeah, and if you want to see my rather strong thoughts on that and the evidence base, definitely check out criminal profiling. These questions are great in theory because knowing the answer to them would certainly be helpful, but they are problematic because of methodological issues. Because I have no idea how you would test these questions all in an empirical way. That's the problem facing researchers, but thankfully some people are making headway too. So we are starting to have an idea, especially as we used to believe that if someone was just exposed to misinformation, then that was enough to make a person believe in it. But more modern research is starting to cast a lot of doubt on the idea. For example, the Grid 2021 suggests that people who are low in certain skills, for example, media literacy, digital literacy, and cognitive skills, may be more prone to misinformation. And personally, this is why I hate tabloids, because in my experience, tabloids simply make up or they just twist stories to make people angry and to sell stories. For example, in February 2023, in the UK, a far-right protest outside a hotel housing migrants waiting to get their asylum claims that protest turned violent because the far-right started beating up innocent migrants. That's the facts. That is what all good news sources like reported, and there was like photos, like videos, reporting that, and that's what the police said. But then the very next day, I saw at least two tabloids reporting that it was the migrants that started the riot, and they were attacking people. And it's basically like, if you're gonna make up stories, at least make them plausible. So this is complete utter rubbish, and this is clear misinformation, but tons of people believed it, sadly. Hence are creating the completely wrong belief that all refugees and migrants are nothing more than criminals. It's wrong, and I hate the myth. Yeah, that, and there were tons of other stories like this week, because I was working with some outreach people that were like, and they had recently worked with a bunch of former refugees, and it was really nice to hear how driven refugees were to actually get in that education and to really start contributing to society. Yeah, but that's a whole different discussion. Anyway, yeah, that's what I always encourage people, but to check your sources whenever you read the news. And that's why there's only two sources that I take my news from. Um, in addition, these findings flat out don't say that people who believe in misinformation just lack key knowledge, since these factors around literacy and cognitive skills don't make up most of the reasons why people probably believe in misinformation. These factors only account for a small part of the problem, as well as it's likely that a knowledge deficiency isn't the reason why misinformation spreads. How do identity characteristics impact misinformation vulnerability? Some other research findings find that identity characteristics could make someone more vulnerable to misinformation. For example, previous research finds that whilst political polarization, meaning both the far left and the far right, is a risk factor for believing in misinformation, people on the political right are more likely to believe in and spread misinformation than people on the political left. Digital Planet 2020. In addition, age and education seems to be risk factors as well, since advanced age is associated with a high likelihood of sharing misinformation, as it only having a high school degree displays more vulnerability to believing in fake or misleading news. Digital Planet 2020. Also, I'm just putting this in because of this was a massive argument that me and a family member had. So I want to say it to try and get ahead of it. So if someone believes for one moment that these research findings are fake because this person believes that researchers manipulated the data because they were left wing and they just wanted to blame the right wing, then these people clearly don't know how academia works, since it is impossible, or to be honest, I guess a fairer way to say, is extremely difficult for researchers nowadays to fake a data, write misleading articles, and to get them professionally published. So the idea that left-wing researchers just wanted to blame the right wing is basically stupid and very funny. Anyway, research on identity and skills-related factors show that certain people are predisposed to believing in and sharing misinformation. So this research is helpful in understanding these factors, but it doesn't answer questions about are there certain psychological or personality factors involved. How psychological and personality factors relate to misinformation vulnerability. Thankfully, in the realm of conspiracy theory research, there have been a good amount of studies in investigating this area with some good findings. For example, certain psychological features like loneliness and isolation, Hudson 2017, and certain personality traits like narcissism, Shikawa and all 2022 do believe to a greater chance of believing in conspiracy theories, but are these psychological and personality factors at all relevant to misinformation? Maybe. The main problem is that misinformation research is still in its infancy, but there is a good research that suggests that psychological factors, if present in their childhood, might affect them in adult life in ways that make them susceptible to misinformation. American Psychological Association News Release 2018. Since generally our childhood beliefs get challenged when we get older, but there is always a strong emotional inclination to hold on to beliefs from our childhood that allow us to maintain family peace. Therefore, as the children learn to come up with rationalizations for the family held beliefs and to maintain them regardless of the challenge, confirmation bias, our tendency to seek out confirming and agreeing evidence for our beliefs get strengthened all the way into adulthood. As a result, the less a child is challenged about their beliefs, the more likely they are to excel with rationalization that gets rid of alternative ideas. On the other hand, if the children are actively taught skepticism and critical thinking, their confirmation bias muscles get a little weaker. Moreover, people with higher levels of anxiety are more prone to a confirmation bias, partly because they have a tendency and a strong reason to block out new information that might threaten them in any way, shape, or form. So that's another psychological factor. Finally, belonging to social groups that believe in certain types of misinformation could strengthen a person's misinformation muscle as well. Since if a person tries to disengage from this belief, then it threatens their identity and group membership. And as we know from social psychology, absolutely no one wants that. So people will believe in misinformation if it helps them to maintain the group membership and identity, even if disconfirming evidence comes to light. How can we protect people against misinformation? Overall, whilst our understanding of misinformation and who's the most vulnerable to it might still be evolving, there are several things we can do to help protect people. Firstly, we can teach children and people the value of skepticism and critical thinking, because that is critical, and research shows that this is always useful to teach. Secondly, We can learn how to recognise people sharing misinformation and how these people might be anxious or trying to defend a deeply held belief, so that we can help these people by approaching them with empathy, compassion, and understanding. Conclusion. So personally, I flat out love that this topic. Misinformation is so critical to understand and protect yourself from because it is everywhere. Which is why personally, I would absolutely love university to be mandatory, since a lot of university courses do teach critical thinking skills, tolerance, and media literacy. So it does help to protect people against misinformation. But I know that will never happen, especially when there are times when misinformation keeps the people in power. However, in the fight against misinformation, we will never get very far if we don't understand how it spreads, where it comes from, and who is most susceptible. The research has to continue, and we might have a long, long way to go in fully understanding this, but progress is being made. And we are already achieving amazing things with this small amount of progress. Just imagine all the stunning things we can do when we start to fully understand misinformation. That really will be an amazing day for sure. So I really hope that you enjoyed today's episode and you got something out of it. I definitely know that I did, and misinformation is a critical topic that will only become more important in the future. So it's always good to look at. And if you know someone who would enjoy today's episode, then please share it with them. I'm always really grateful when you wonderful people help spread the word about the podcast. And definitely check out Social Psychology, a guide to social and cultural psychology, available in all the usual places, including my own PayHip store at payhip.com/Con so you can buy it directly from me. But if you didn't want to buy a book, but you still wanted to give the podcast a bit of one-time support, then you can buy me a coffee at buymeacoffee.com/Con. So have a great day, everyone, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for listening today. I hope you found it helpful. Please remember to like the video and subscribe to the YouTube channel and follow the podcast on your favourite podcast app. And if you wanted to learn more, then please check out the backlist of the podcast episodes or my books at conwhiteley.net. So have a great day and I'll see you next time.